On the night of September 15, 1940, a truth hit the Royal Air Force like a shockwave. A truth so brutal that Air Chief Marshal Charles Portal could hardly believe the numbers placed before him. Bomber Command had sent 180 aircraft to crush the arms factories in Essen, the industrial engine powering Hitler's war. But the reconnaissance photos developed 3 days later told a devastating story. Less than 5 out of every 100 bombers had hit anywhere near the real target. The rest had scattered their bombs across the Ruhr countryside, destroying empty fields instead of war factories. Portal stared at the images, realizing something terrifying. Britain's entire bombing strategy was collapsing. It wasn't about courage. Crews were already flying through flak and fighters with incredible bravery. The real enemy was navigation technology stuck in the past. Bomber crews still relied on dead reckoning, map reading, and celestial navigation, techniques built for ships, not night raids over blackout Germany. Searchlights killed their night vision, anti-aircraft fire forced constant turns, clouds hit every landmark, and strong winds pushed planes miles off course without anyone knowing. By 1941, raids on Cologne proved things were even worse. Bombs were landing across a 40-mile spread. Entire bomber streams were missing whole cities while believing they had destroyed them. The math was unforgiving. Britain was losing bombers, crews, and ton after ton of explosives, while German factories kept running. When Air Marshal Arthur "Bomber" Harris took command in early 1942, he inherited a force built on hope rather than accuracy. Even he knew that without a way to find and mark targets, strategic bombing might fail completely. The answer was bold and controversial. Create an elite group, a force within a force, whose job was to locate targets first and mark them for everyone else. Germany had already used a similar tactic during the Blitz. Their Pathfinders, led by Kampfgruppe 100, had used radio beams to mark British cities with unnerving accuracy. The RAF needed its own version, one built for longer missions and far heavier defenses. Group Captain Sidney Bufton pushed the idea through 1941, arguing that concentrating the best navigators and bomb aimers would lift the accuracy of the whole bomber force. But resistance was fierce. Squadron leaders didn't want to give up their top crews. Some officers insisted everyone should be equally skilled. Even Harris resisted at first. But the failures became impossible to ignore, and the political pressure too strong. On August 11, 1942, the Pathfinder Force was officially born. Its commander was the 32-year-old Australian genius Donald Bennett, already famous for his navigation skills across the Atlantic. Bennett believed that science and discipline could turn chaos into precision. He began building his elite squadrons, 7, 35, 83, 156, and 109, choosing the best navigators, the sharpest bomb aimers, and crews willing to operate deep inside enemy defenses. But there was one problem. The tools they needed didn't exist yet. Standard RAF flares were too dim, too simple, and impossible to use for guiding hundreds of aircraft. Bennett demanded new target indicators, lights bright enough to cut through smoke, distinct colors for coded instructions, and long burn times so the main bomber force could follow them. Imperial Chemical Industries, ICI, took on the challenge. The science was extreme. The indicators had to survive freezing altitudes, ignite reliably, burn at 2000 degrees Celsius, and shine through clouds of industrial smoke. The result was the 250-pound target indicator canister, packed with colored stars that burst out across the sky. Each color carried meaning. Red for the primary aiming point, green for alternate targets, yellow for corrections when the markers drifted. Released from 15,000 to 20,000 feet, the canisters scattered dozens of glowing stars under tiny parachutes. To bomber crews, it looked like colored constellations falling in slow motion, unmistakable guidance in a world of darkness and flak. But to make the system foolproof, Bennett developed a new marking plan, perfected at the coastal town of New Haven. It became the foundation of modern precision bombing. And it always began the same way. The first Pathfinder wave, the Illuminators, arrived 3 minutes before everyone else, dropping brilliant magnesium light that turned the target area into temporary daylight. And as the Illuminators' white glare faded into the night, the next phase of the Pathfinder plan unfolded. The magnesium flares, each burning at nearly 2 million candle power, drifted down on parachutes for 3 full minutes. Under this artificial moonlight, the landscape finally revealed itself. River curves, railway lines, factory shapes, features crews had studied for days, suddenly appeared out of the darkness. Bomb aimers quickly memorized what they saw. They had only seconds. Then came the primary markers, the most skilled navigators and bomb aimers in the entire Pathfinder Force. Their Lancasters carried only red target indicators, which had to land directly on the selected aiming point. Each bomb aimer had rehearsed the target layout until he could redraw it from memory. As they released their markers, bright crimson stars scattered downward, forming glowing red clusters that marked the exact point for the main bomber force. A perfect primary marking meant all red indicators landing inside a 200-yard circle, turning map coordinates into a visible bullseye that hundreds of bombers could follow without needing advanced navigation. But Bennett knew the sky over Germany was never stable. Smoke, wind, and defensive fires could hide or extinguish markers. That's why the backers up arrived next, slipping into the target area every 2 minutes. Each carried mixed colors, usually red and green, and adjusted their drops based on what they saw. If the original reds were still bright and accurate, they reinforced them. If smoke had covered the area, they dropped green indicators slightly offset, signaling new aim points to the arriving bomber waves. These carefully timed intervals weren't guesswork. Bennett's staff had studied dozens of raids, tracking how fast smoke thickened and how long target indicators remained clear. 2 minutes proved the sweet spot, frequent enough to keep the target alive, spaced enough that crews could still see what they were doing. Main force crews had simple, clear instructions. Bomb the reds. Or, in more complex cases, if reds are lost, bomb the greens 100 yards north. Or, if markers drift, use yellows with a 200-yard offset. This color-coded language let the RAF redirect hundreds of aircraft without using radios the Germans could intercept. The brilliance of the New Haven method was its adaptability. If primary markers fell in the wrong district, a real risk on nights with heavy wind, the backers up could correct the mistake instantly by dropping new colors on the proper target. German civilians, huddling in shelters beneath cities like Hamburg and Berlin, soon created their own name for the glowing display. Christbaum, Christmas trees. A mix of wonder and fear. Hundreds of colored stars drifting downward in vertical layers, bright reds, greens, and yellows stacked in tiers from high altitude to just above the rooftops. The beauty was undeniable. So was the terror. When the colors appeared, everyone in the city knew the truth. The bombs were coming exactly here. Even German propaganda struggled to frame the phenomenon. Early broadcasts condemned it as British cruelty. Later, Goebbels attempted to twist it into a symbol of German endurance, a test the nation would survive. But civilians understood the markers with grim clarity. Once they appeared, there was no hope that the attack might fall elsewhere. The lights also told German night fighter controllers where the RAF intended to strike. The markers glowed so brightly they were visible for nearly 50 miles, allowing fighters to converge on the area before the bomber stream arrived. From above, Pathfinder crews watched their own work unfolding in real time. A tight, vertical column of mostly red lights meant success. Scattered colors meant trouble, poor navigation, drifting wind, or heavy enemy fire. But despite the method's growing success through late 1942 and early 1943, one major weakness remained. Once the Pathfinders dropped their markers and headed home, no one stayed over the target to guide the rest of the force. If conditions changed, there was no senior voice to correct errors or direct new markers. Donald Bennett wanted to change that. So he introduced a new, daring idea. An airborne commander who would stay above the target the entire time, coordinating the attack in real time. A master bomber. The concept became reality on the night of August 3, 1943, during the Hamburg raids. Group Captain John Searby circled the burning city in his Lancaster, calmly directing the attack over radio as flak burst around him. His voice carried across the bomber stream, steady, precise, unshaken, guiding hundreds of aircraft toward their target. And from that point, the attack shifted into a new phase of control. Now the Master Bomber's voice took over the night sky. Main Force, this is Master Bomber. Red markers are correct. Bomb the reds. Repeat, bomb the red indicators. This single innovation changed pathfinding from a carefully planned sequence into real-time battlefield direction. But it also placed the Master Bomber in one of the most dangerous jobs in Bomber Command. His aircraft had to circle the target for the entire raid, usually half an hour or more, flying at 12 to 15,000 feet, low enough to see the markers clearly but high enough to avoid colliding with the bomber stream pushing through below. That altitude sat right in the heart of Germany's light flak belt. The sky filled with 20mm and 37mm bursts aimed directly at the circling commander. While the rest of the force made one pass and turned for home, the master bomber stayed above the burning target, exposed to fighters, flak, smoke, and the chaos of hundreds of aircraft converging. Radio discipline mattered more than survival instinct. Master bombers spoke constantly. Deputy, place greens 500 yards east of the Reds. Main force from the north, you're heading straight toward your markers. But continuous broadcasting made them easy to track. German direction-finding posts could pinpoint their signal and steer night fighters directly toward them. Bennett accepted the danger because the tactical gain was enormous. A special vocabulary developed for clarity under pressure. Reds are accurate. Attack red markers directly. Overshoot the greens 200 yards north. Offset instructions. Ignore yellows, decoys. Stop bombing, markers incorrect, halt the raid. Crews also trained to recognize the master bomber's voice, since German operators sometimes transmitted false commands, trying to redirect British aircraft. The mental burden on master bombers was unlike anything else in the air war. They alone saw the whole battle unfolding under them, whether markers held, where bombs fell, how fires spread, and when an attack drifted off target. Group Captain Hamish Mahadi said it felt like conducting an orchestra, except every wrong note meant destruction on the ground. Even Bennett flew as master bomber despite being commander of Pathfinder Force. His calm, clipped Australian voice correcting the attack while his Lancaster shook under flak became famous among crews. And the numbers proved the concept. Marker accuracy improved by up to 40%, and bomb concentration increased dramatically. But the cost was high. Master bomber losses averaged around 12% per operation, far greater than the Pathfinder average. The German countermoves, a tactical chess match. By early 1943, German intelligence realized British accuracy was improving faster than they could respond. Major Hajo Hermann warned that without effective countermeasures, German industry would be crushed by concentrated raids. Germany reacted quickly. 1. Dummy fire sites, Scheinenlige. These were carefully built fake targets on open ground around real cities. Fires, wooden buildings, light arrays, designed to mimic industrial areas. When Pathfinders marked the real target, German operators lit the dummy sites, hoping to fool late-arriving crews. A few raids around Essen showed craters miles away in farmland where crews had been misled. 2. Counter markers. Special Luftwaffe units dropped their own colored markers, using captured or copied British target indicators. Their goal: scatter fake colors across the sky so bomber crews wouldn't know which cluster to trust. 3. Fake radio commands. English-speaking German operators broadcast instructions impersonating master bombers. This forced Bennett to introduce authentication codes that changed every operation. 4. Searchlights designed to hunt Pathfinders. Instead of trapping bombers for flak, searchlight crews used a scanning pattern aimed at catching the first Pathfinders during their marking runs. Once one was caught, all lights in the area converged, creating a lethal cone. Losses rose sharply among illuminators and primary markers. Bennett countered with unpredictable timing. Sometimes illuminators arrived 2 minutes early, sometimes 5, sometimes with decoy flashes to exhaust searchlight crews before the real Pathfinders arrived. 5. Radio jamming. German units blasted noise across master bomber frequencies. The RAF responded with powerful airborne transmitters to boost the master bomber's voice above the interference. Each side changed tactics so quickly that pathfinding became a constant race of innovation versus counter-innovation. Operation Gamara, Pathfinder accuracy at its peak. The bombing of Hamburg in late July 1943 became the ultimate test of Bennett's system, and its most tragic outcome. Hamburg was chosen for clear strategic reasons: major U-boat shipyards, oil refineries, and heavy industry. Its shape along the Elbe made it easy to identify even in poor visibility. July 24, 1943. Pathfinders executed New Haven marking with record precision. Illuminators lit the river bends at exactly 23:57. Primary markers placed their reds within a few hundred yards of the aiming point, and backers up held the pattern steady as nearly 800 aircraft bombed over 45 minutes. Photographs the next day showed over 70% of bombs had hit the marked zone, 3 times better than typical raids. July 27th, the firestorm night. On the second attack, the combination of extreme heat, high winds, low humidity, and Pathfinder accuracy created the conditions that meteorologists later defined as a true firestorm. Thousands of fires merged into a single burning zone. The rising heat pulled in air at hurricane strength, feeding the flames in a self-accelerating cycle. Temperatures soared far beyond anything expected in a conventional raid, and the effects on the city were catastrophic. Over 40,000 civilians died, more than Britain lost to bombing across the entire war. Many shelters filled with smoke and heat even without structural collapse. Survivors described winds pulling people toward the burning center. Pathfinder markers had done their job with perfect precision, but the consequences went far beyond what any aircrew imagined when they released their indicators. Bennett viewed the reconnaissance photos with complex emotions, professional validation mixed with profound awareness of the human cost. The aftermath of Hamburg made clear that Pathfinder techniques now defined the effectiveness of bomber command. Tactically, the system had worked exactly as designed, yet the sheer scale of destruction, especially civilian losses, unsettled even those fully committed to the strategic bombing campaign. Harris regarded Hamburg as proof that concentrated attacks could cripple German industry and morale at once. Churchill, despite visible unease at the casualty reports, authorized the remaining raids. By early August, Hamburg's housing stock had collapsed by 3/4, production had fallen drastically, and nearly 1 million people had fled the city. None of this would have been possible without the Pathfinder's accuracy. Without their markers, the bombing would have dispersed widely and achieved far less. But precision came with a brutal mathematical cost. Ordinary bomber crews already faced dangerous odds. Pathfinder crews confronted even worse. Roughly 8% losses per mission, and they were expected to complete 45 operations instead of 30. Statistically, most knew they would not finish a full tour. The reasons were built into the role. They arrived first, flew predictable approaches, and had to hold straight and level during marking runs, giving German gunners clear firing solutions. Master bombers endured the harshest exposure, orbiting the target for long periods while transmitting non-stop instructions that made them easy to track. Losses cut deeply into squadron morale. Experienced navigators and bomb aimers, the specialists who made pathfinding function, disappeared with grim regularity. Units developed ritualized ways to cope. Effects cleared before surviving crews returned, names removed swiftly from rosters, and memorials held in groups to avoid constant individual mourning. Some aircrew asked for transfers despite the stigma. Others became fatalistic, convinced outcomes lay beyond personal control. Bennett insisted that standards must never slip, replacing lost crews only with those who met full Pathfinder requirements. The result preserved accuracy but created chronic manpower shortages. He continued flying himself, believing leadership required sharing the same risks he asked his crews to bear. Captured Pathfinders, because of their technical knowledge, faced targeted interrogation, a danger they all understood. Despite the cost, the methods they developed shaped military doctrine long after the war. The basic idea, that specialized teams could mark or identify targets so that larger forces could attack with precision, proved universally adaptable. Early Cold War air forces, including the newly independent RAF and the U.S. Strategic Air Command, absorbed Pathfinder principles into jet era and nuclear planning. In Korea, forward air controllers on the ground effectively became Pathfinders with smoke instead of flares. In Vietnam, low-flying FAC aircraft marking jungle-hidden targets with white phosphorus rockets replicated the same relationship between marker and bomber that Bennett had pioneered. Even the Falklands conflict saw a near-direct revival when Vulcans on the Black Buck raids used lead aircraft to illuminate the runway for others. Later, the rise of laser-guided weapons represented evolution rather than replacement. The colored flares simply became coded beams, but the logic of specialists guiding strike aircraft remained unchanged. Modern forces still reflect this lineage. U.S. combat controllers, NATO JTACs, and other targeting specialists perform missions almost identical in structure to Pathfinders. Arrive early, locate and confirm targets, and guide follow-on attacks using disciplined communication. Their terminology, authentication procedures, and emphasis on precision under pressure all trace back to the master bomber orbiting over Germany. Perhaps the deepest legacy is institutional. Bennett proved that finding the target is its own profession, requiring dedicated selection, training, and judgment. Today's separation between those who identify targets and those who deliver munitions, standard practice in modern militaries, originated with his vision. The flares that once burned over European cities are gone, but the principles behind them continue to shape how precision warfare is conducted across the world.